Thanks, Justin. Well, thank you. Well, thank you. It's great to be here today. Excited to be in amongst fellow data geeks. I am a data geek at heart, and being here today with you all has just been awesome. It's been a great week, and hopefully I'm going to give you something that you can learn from and take back and try to implement at your organization. So today I'm going to talk about something a little bit different than we've been talking about this whole week. I'm not going to talk about that fancy thing, that cool tool necessarily. I'm going to talk about the process, the journey that we went through to get to the point where we are ready to tackle what's coming at us. So that's what I want to talk about today. I'm glad no one left when I said I want to talk about the journey, so I think it's going to be a good thing. So we hear all the time, where we go to a conference like this or we pick up a trade magazine, we hear about big data, right? That is coming at us, that's here today. We need to figure out how to use big data, and what do we do with this? We see these really cool applications for it. We go out in the hall out here and see many, many different applications for big data and how people are using data. And then we go back home and we try to implement something. And we find that it's very frustrating. We can't get down the path. So I want to talk about that path and how we get down that path. They say by 2020, there'll be over 30 billion things that we're getting information from. 30 billion things. That's a lot of things, right? That's a lot of stuff that we're going to have to try to figure out, whether that's sensors in pavement, whether that is, information from vehicles, whatever that might be. It's going to come to us, and we're going to have to figure out a way to use it and implement it and make better decisions from it. So is your organization ready? I'm talking to a group that most of your organizations are ready, right? You're ready to implement that, but most DOTs out there are not. So how do we get there? So in order to do that, in order to explain how we got there, I want to start with a theory. Something we've been working on for a while now. It's very, very scientifically based. Years and years of data went into this, so you'll appreciate that when I show it to you. It looks something like this. That's the theory. It's an exponential curve. That's basically it. So I want to talk a little bit about this curve, and you can see, yes, it is not scientifically based. I just drew it. I thought, what does it look like? It looks like this, and I go on the internet and say, is there an exponential curve graphic out there? That's what we have. I've been talking about this for a while at the DOT, and the first few times I did this, an engineer come up to me and say, I don't think your curve's right. You're right, it's not. It's not correct. It's a theory. He said, well, it waves. Innovation goes through peaks along this curve. And so he starts doing this with his hand, and I said, well, do a best fit of that, whatever you just did. And he's like, oh, okay, it's okay. So this is the best fit of some theory. But just use your imagination. This is for illustrative purposes. It doesn't mean that this is exactly right or whatever. Let me explain a little bit here. On the bottom you see is time. On the left, on the y-axis, I can talk y and x-axis in a group like this, right? I was in New York just this week giving a presentation on risk-based project management. I don't think I could have said x and y-axis with that group. A bunch of bankers, financial folks. I needed to be, the bottom and the side. So here it's x and y. I hope they're not watching this live. I'm going to be in trouble. So on the y-axis, you have innovation change. The rate of change on the bottom is time. So throughout this life cycle of innovation, things are driving innovation. Things like failure, risk. We heard Tom talk about risk earlier. Technology. And I think some of the biggest driver throughout this whole thing is the culture of your organization. How do you think about innovation at your organization? What's driving you? But throughout this curve, the drivers change. The most important drivers change throughout this curve. Let me give you, for example, down in the bottom is where most government agencies are. In the bottom, innovation's happening, but it's really, really slow. And it's slow because most of those organizations are run by engineers, like myself, who are very conservative. And in order for us to innovate, we want to mitigate every single bit of risk out of that before we take the chance to mitigate or to innovate, right? To do that takes a lot of time. So over the course of time, innovation is happening, but it's going very, very slow. The biggest driver here is the fear of failure. And that's something you have to overcome if you're going to move through this chain. is how do you overcome the idea of the fear of failure? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. So the next, whoops, let me go back one. In order to move up through this curve, you need to start changing your culture. Changing that idea that failure is a bad thing. And you want to change your mindset to failure is just another form of feedback, right? It's just another attempt at doing something. You're learning from it. You're growing from it. And if you can do that, you're going to move up this curve into that more curvy section of the curve. To change your culture, you need to start thinking about something like what Walt Disney might say. Failure is only the opportunity to begin again, only this time more wisely. That's really a profound thing. If you can get your organization to think like this, you can innovate much, much quicker. But that's very, very difficult. So that's to get past that inflection point, that bottom of the curve into the part where I think the governments of the future need to be, is in this little curve here. You need to convert your mindset from failure to failure as feedback. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of leadership on your part. A lot of conversations need to happen to get you to this point. So the first time I gave this, my boss said, well, why, Shane, are you saying we should be in that bottom little curve right there and not up in this top section? Well, I think primarily that's because innovation is happening so fast that consistency is a difficult thing. It's difficult for a DOT to maintain consistency with innovation happening that quickly. At the Utah Department of Transportation, we have 4 regions throughout our state, all doing slightly different things, all innovating in a different place throughout this curve. But we need to maintain some sort of consistency between those 4. You can't drive down the interstate and have an 8-foot lane 1 minute and a 10-foot lane the next minute and a 12-foot lane the next minute, right? You need some consistency. So I don't think that the public sector should be up there where the private sector is. Let me give you a good example of what happens in the private sector when they're up there. Things are happening very, very quickly. Has anyone heard of Samsung and their Galaxy Note 7, right? They build a phone that burst into flames. You're like, hey, honey, how's it going? My ear's on fire, right? That's not good, but what did they do? They gave you an 8, and they said, here you go, move on. And everyone went, oh, okay, next. Can you imagine if I build a road that burst into flames? I don't get to move on from that, right? Tom talked about this earlier. I end up in the paper as the guy that, I can't even imagine, the guy that had a road burst into flames. That's me. That's my legacy. So innovating that quickly is very difficult for a DOT. So I don't think we should be there. I think that's up to the private sector. The private sector can pull us along this curve, doing some innovative stuff, allowing us a chance to catch up, to implement those within our organization, and then move through the curve. So that's the theory. Now let me talk about our journey along that path, okay? I think this is similar to what most organizations go through. Now the steps might not be the same for everyone. They might be labeled something differently, but the idea is, I think, pretty sound. So step 1 is gather data. Who is not good at this? I mean, right? We really do this well. We do this so well that we create silos all across our organization, data silos all across, right? And we create some really intense ownership of those silos. It's their data. I collected the data, so it's mine. It's mine to use. It's your job to ask me something about it, but you can't have access to it, right? So I'm the deputy director of the department, and I don't get to touch it in some cases, right? I have to ask, hey, please, can you tell me how many crashes we had over the last 15 years per year? Sure, Shane, I'll get back to you. Well, just give me the data. No. I guess my history's preceded me, and they understand what I might do with that data, so it's probably best that they don't let me touch it. But that's the conversation everyone in the organization has to have. Hey, can I have this? Can you tell me this? I can't access it. I can't get into it. So we need to break down those silos. But if you see where you're at in this curve, you're down here in the part where fear is driving you. The fear of failure is driving you. So how do you overcome that? It's not like they don't want to give you access. They're afraid of what might happen if you have access. They're afraid of what the data might tell you if you have access to it. Because you know when you ask that question, give me this results. They go back, they get the results, They massage the data a little bit because it's not perfect data. It never is. But they have to do some work to it before they give it to you. If I had access to it, all of those things would be exposed. So that's the fear. And so how do you convince someone that that's okay? It's okay that there's gaps. It's okay that there's things missing within the data. You're not gonna get fired if I find these things. We're trying to improve this. We're trying to improve the decision-making process by allowing everyone to have access. So how do you convince them that? You need to change that culture. So the next step, the very first thing, you finally convince someone that it's okay to share, and they say, okay, fine, I'll share. I'll just send my Excel spreadsheet out there, the whole entire department, have at it, right? That's the solution. No, you need something, you need a tool. At UDOT, we partner with Socrata and Grant Thornton to deliver that tool to us, to have a platform where we can have some consistency across our entire organization, and allow us to put data into, have everyone have access to it. So I know what you're thinking. We have Socrata, and some of you know Tom Williams, and you're thinking, why would you buy Socrata if Tom Williams works there, right? I hope he's here, because if he's not here, that joke doesn't go over well. No, it's been a great ride. Both Grant Thornton and Socrata have really stepped up. This part of the journey has been the most difficult part, and not because of the software. It's because of the process and the length of time it takes to get things into the program so that you can use it. Because the data is not perfect, like I said before in step one. And now it's exposed, and now you need to figure out how to fix it. And it's not just one data set, it's multiple data sets. So you put the data in there, now we're trying to establish some consistency, and you're trying to convince people again. Still, you're down in the bottom of the curve where failure is the biggest driver. How do you get them to get it in there? How do you change that culture while you're in this process? Because it takes a long time. This is the longest step for us in this entire thing, was getting to this point where we could access the data across the entire system. Once you get there, you've moved up through the curve, and then it becomes quick. But here's difficult, and here it takes a lot of patience. A lot of patience on leadership part, a lot of conversations on leadership part, to be in the room, to have those conversations about, this is where we are. We want to be up here, but let's not worry about that today. Let's talk about this step right now. How do we get all our data in here so we can ask better questions, right? That's what happens in this phase. So next, you move up the curve a little bit, and you start to integrate. What do I mean by integrate? I mean that you have the data in there. Now you're making data-driven decisions with that data in there. You get to ask some really cool questions that you couldn't ask before, and I can access it. I can get in there and do it myself. I can say to the system, hey, give me all the crashes over the last 5 years. Boom, there it is today. Then I can say, give me all the crashes over the last 5 years on pavement with poor conditions. Now I have that. I couldn't ever ask that before. If I did, I had to go to 2 people, and they had to somehow figure that out together. Now I can ask that. I can get that on my desk. And I can see whether the data is good or bad and fix it. I can't fix it. Someone can fix it, right? I can call someone and say, hey, there's some data problems. Let's get this fixed. But the idea is we can now share it, and now we have 1,600 eyes looking at this data, not just one. And we're using it to leverage things. We're using it to make better data-driven decisions. That's when it starts to become really, really cool. This is not a long process. This one's pretty quick. Number 2 was the tough one. So number 4 is refine. Now the data's in there. You're just about on the verge of going up the path and creating some really cool culture within your organization. You're just right there. Data's in. You're asking good questions. People expect the data to be in there now. Now it's not a question of should we. It's a question of where is the data. Why isn't this data set there? Why isn't that data set there? I need this. I need this. What? You're a traffic person. Why do you need pavement data? You are whatever that might be. Now they expect it. Now they want it. Now your culture is changing. Now the fun really starts to begin. You're really refining it. You're making better decisions. What we did at this step is we started talking about outcomes. We said, if you've given us $50 million, and what are the outcomes across the entire system? Not just to pavement, not just to traffic, but overall, what are those outcomes? So we have 3 strategic goals that we've been talking about now for 15 years. They're very similar throughout the states. 0 fatalities, preserve infrastructure, and optimize mobility. So pretty simple, straightforward 3 goals. How do we measure those? How do we know that we're accomplishing those goals? Before this, we tried to do it with a bunch of performance measures when we said, well, this one goes up, this one goes down, this one is kind of sideways, so we're good, right? I baffled you with a bunch of data, and I said, we're good. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. OK. Here, now we're starting to combine data sets together, and we can actually show you how those goals move. Very powerful stuff. It creates a whole level of transparency you never had before. So this is a fun stage. This is a great spot. The next one is what you're preparing for this whole journey. And there is no way you could make this step if you were down in step one. There's just absolutely no way. This is what people fear when you start talking about this whole thing, is you make it live and you make it accessible and you put it out in the open source. You let people see it. You let the public see it. You let the legislature see it. This is the scariest part. But if you've gone through this path, you're ready for it. You're ready for that extra set of eyes. You're ready for that accountability, and you're ready for that transparency. This is what you're working for. So when we got to this point, we started working on what we call our strategic direction. So over the last 10 years, this strategic direction has been a document. It's been a 20, 30-page document that we take to the legislature and say, here you go. This is what you need to know about the Utah Department of Transportation. This is all the good things we have done. These are all the initiatives we're working on. And they, okay, thanks. And they look at it and for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and they put it in the briefcase, and I don't think they ever sees the light of day again. So what we did is we wanted to make this live, interactive, and right in their face. So we now have this system in place. Since we've gone through all these steps, we now have this system in place that we can show them in real time where we are at. So this last legislative session, we did this for the first time. Normally, we'd come in there with a PowerPoint, 15, 20 slides, and we'd go through them all and show all the performance measures. This time, we decided to do it completely live from the website. It's so live that the night before, I'm looking through the data, because I need to try to figure out what the story is. And the data said something. I come the next morning ready to present, and it changed. The downside of having live data. It changes on you, right? It went down a little bit, but it was explainable. And that story, I was able to tell the legislature that story, that yesterday it was this, today it's this. They were like, wow, really? Real time? Our fatalities, they're not at, our goal is not 100. Our goal is 100, but it's not there today. It went down a little bit because the night before there was a couple fatalities, and so it drove our measure down. But I was able to click through each one of these, show the performance of each one, why we are where we're at, what they got for their billions of dollars investment in infrastructure. This is what they got. And for the first time ever, their heads were down in their screens. So each one of them have a screen in front of them, in their screens, looking at it, stepping through it with us. Normally, they might be on their phone, they might be coming in and out, but they were right there engaged with us the entire time, asking questions that I was shocked by. Why this, Shane? Why is this dip in 2005? What happened then? What happened in 2012 with your pavement? Whatever that might be. 2 years ago, they passed a gas tax increase for 5 cents. And we were able to show them with this data what happened to our pavement condition because of that 5-cent gas tax increase. That's what you spent. This is your outcomes. Simple, easy to explain. They're like, wow. How do we get to this? How do I show this to my constituents? Why aren't other state agencies doing this? So we get done with this meeting. We have some folks listening to the audio back at home. And the chair says, that was pretty cool. You are the best state agency we've had because of this tool. Other state agencies are doing wonderful things, right? They're all doing great things. But we're able to show them very transparently what we've accomplished. Our folks back home are like, wow, they're cheering, right? All their hard work goes into these 3 measures. Everything we do, we push snow, we fix potholes, we road-mill and overlay projects, we widen things, all shows up in these 3 goals. Their hard work comes to fruition right there, and now they can see it, and now we can show and explain and tell people our story. It was the best moment in the last 5 years of my career. It's been so cool to watch our folks interact with this and the journey that we've gone on with this. It's been very, very impressive. So what's after that? Well, like I said, I think the future is right there. I think that's where DOTs, that's where the public sector should be, right in this nice little sweet spot, where we're ready. We're ready for that big data. We're ready for the $20, $30 billion, 30 billion different sensors out there to give us that data. We're ready to make those next decisions. I don't know what they're going to be, but we have a system in place that allows us to be able to do that. And more importantly, we have the culture in place that's going to get us there. It won't be, oh, I'm just so sick of data now. That's not going to be the conversation. It'll be bring it on. Bring me more data so I can make better decisions, right? At this point, your data governance, which has been so lackadaisical, I think, throughout our entire life, is now in place. When we collect data, we don't just collect it anymore. Now we're asking the question, what are we going to use it for? What does it need to look like? Where's it going to be? Who's going to store it? Who's going to maintain it? All those things now we're asking instead of just collecting for collecting's sake. And it's putting us into a position that we're ready for the future. So I say bring it on. Bring it on, private sector. We're ready for you. And I know Socrata is pushing us every single day to get better and better and better. So we're excited about that. Lastly, this is where the private sector lives, I think. Keep pushing. Staff, keep pushing, keep bringing those technologies to us, and we're going to be ready to use them. And I want every DOT, every government agency to be able to be ready to do this as well. That's why I think it's so important to talk about this journey, because everyone needs to be ready. And you cannot walk into your office expecting to be at Make It Live if you're at Gather Data. You can't do it, and don't have that expectation. So there's a couple things I want you to take away. You have some assignments, right? You don't get to come for free. You have to work. I had to stand up here. You guys are going to have to work a little bit. So I want you to figure out where you are. Your curve might not look like this, but what does your curve look like? And where are you along it? What is that next step that you need to take? Not 6 steps away, but that next one. Go back, figure out where you are, and take that next step. Articulate where you want to go, because as a leader of the organization, you need to know where you want to go, right? You know you want to make it live and give it out to the public. Great. Let's talk about step 2. Let's really focus on step 2 today, or step 3, or wherever you might be. Make sure you talk about that next step. So that really about wraps me up. I'm a little bit early. In my room, this took like 45 minutes, so I'm not sure why I'm 7 minutes early. Really start thinking about what is that next step. I think it's so easy to come here and get overwhelmed. It really, truly is. I know that for years I would come to something like this and just go, oh, yes, I'm going to go back and I'm going to get this done, and just flounder. Because I forgot step 1. I forgot step 2. So think about your steps. Make your own curve. Make it wavy if you want to. It doesn't matter. It's the process. It's the thought. It's the culture change that you need to go through to get to the point where you can be ready to tackle what is coming at us. Because it's coming at us so much quicker than ever before. You know, back in the day, it's not like an old person, because I am. Back in the day, technology was pushing this along, right? All the challenges that we have today were there 10 years ago, but the rate has changed significantly. And is your organization ready for that rate change? Do you have the right policies and procedures and guidance in place to adapt to this rate change? I would suggest that you don't. I know that we didn't. I know that we don't. I know that we need to change things to make sure that we're ready and just keep moving down that curve. So with that, you have an assignment. Go back, fulfill your assignment, make your organization better by going to that next step. All right? So with that, I thank you all. I appreciate it. Thanks for the time. Thanks for your patience. Okay.